In 1883, in Savannah, a girl poses with her doll for what seems like an innocent portrait. But 140 years later, one zoom exposes the unthinkable. Margot Reyes is just doing her job, scanning old photographs in a college archive. It's midnight, rain hammering the windows, when she zooms in on a little girl's antique doll. At first, nothing seems wrong, just another old picture from Georgia's past. But then she sees it. Hidden in the doll's glass eye is something that shouldn't exist, a reflection that makes no sense. She zooms closer and closer, until tiny stitches in the doll's dress spell out two words that make her blood run cold. Help me. This isn't just some old photograph. This is evidence of a crime that someone wanted buried forever. The girl in the photo, 10-year-old Liddy Harper, adopted by Savannah's most powerful family. The doll, it holds secrets stitched by a 14-year-old housemaid who vanished the day after this picture was taken. And the wealthy family who owned them both, they've spent 140 years making sure nobody asks the right questions. But Margot can't stop digging. Every clue leads her deeper into Savannah's dark past, where Spanish moss hides terrible truths and old money silences inconvenient voices. The closer she gets to the truth, the more dangerous it becomes, because some families will do anything to protect their secrets. When the past and present collide in a city built on buried sins, Margot discovers that some voices refuse to stay silent even after 140 years. But will uncovering the truth destroy her life? And what really happened to the girl who left that desperate message in threads so fine it took modern technology to read her cry for help? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Lightning rattled the windows of the Savannah College of Art and Design archive as Margot Reyes adjusted the scanner's calibration for the third time that night. The clock on her workstation read 11:04 p.m., but sleep felt as distant as the thunder rolling across the Savannah River. She lifted the 1883 portrait carefully, positioning it face down on the high-resolution scanner bed. The image showed a pale little girl in white lace, seated beside a tall window. In her arms rested an elaborate porcelain doll with painted features and a miniature blue dress. Margot had seen thousands of such photographs during her fellowship, Victorian families posing with their most prized possessions, frozen in sepia dignity. But something about this one nagged at her. Maybe it was the girl's eyes, wide and hollow despite her practiced smile, or the way shadows fell across the doll's face, creating an almost human expression of distress. Margot shook her head. Too much coffee and too many late nights were making her see things that weren't there. She thought of Elena, her younger sister, who used to beg for bedtime stories about magical photographs that could speak. Elena would have loved this archive, would have invented elaborate histories for every portrait. But Elena had been gone for 2 years now, another victim of domestic violence that escalated too quickly for anyone to stop. Margot pressed the scan button and watched the light bar sweep across the photograph. The digital image appeared on her monitor pixel by pixel, revealing details invisible to the naked eye. She zoomed in on the girl's face first, then the doll's porcelain features. Something glinted oddly in the doll's glass eye, a reflection that didn't match any known photographic process from the 1880s. Frowning, Margot increased the magnification to 800%. The doll's eye filled her screen, and there, caught in the curved glass surface, was the outline of a tiny metal plate. Her heart began to race. In 15 years of photo restoration, she'd never seen anything like it. Margot's fingertip hovered over the trackpad, her pulse echoing the thunder outside. She applied a contrast filter, watching as the image sharpened and resolved. The metal plate reflection became clearer, but it was the area around it that made her breath catch. Thread, impossibly thin threadwork in the doll's dress seams, barely visible even at this magnification. She adjusted the contrast again, and letters began to emerge from the stitching pattern. H-E-L. A particularly loud crack of thunder made her jump, but she couldn't look away from the screen. The threadwork was deliberate, careful, hidden where only extreme magnification would reveal it. Someone had stitched a message into this doll's dress, with thread finer than human hair. Margot's hands shook as she reached for her phone. Dr. Silas Carr answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Margot, it's nearly midnight. Is everything—" "Pear, I need you to see something. Can I share my screen with you?" A pause. This had better be extraordinary. The video call connected, and Margot watched Dr. Carr's reflection appear in the corner of her monitor. Even in his pajamas, the distinguished historian managed to look skeptical. "Look at this," Margot said, highlighting the threadwork. "Someone stitched letters into the doll's dress. I can make out HEL so far." Dr. Carr squinted at his screen, adjusting his glasses. "The lighting in that photograph could create optical illusions. Are you certain?" "I'm certain. This isn't a trick of shadows. Someone deliberately hid a message in this doll." Dr. Carr was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he sighed. "9 a.m. tomorrow. My office. We'll examine the original glass negative if the message is truly there." The call ended, leaving Margot alone with the portrait. She saved the file as possible _message type and leaned back in her chair. Overhead, she could hear the faint sound of water dripping, but she was too absorbed in the discovery to pay attention. The building was old, after all. Something was always leaking somewhere. Gray morning light filtered through Dr. Carr's office windows when Margot arrived at 9:05 a.m., clutching a portfolio of printouts. The office was lined floor to ceiling with gilt-framed daguerreotypes, each one a window into Savannah's antebellum past. Dr. Carr sat behind a mahogany desk that had probably witnessed more history than most museums. "Show me," he said without preamble. Margot spread the enhanced images across his desk. In daylight, with high-quality prints, the threadwork was undeniable. Dr. Carr studied each image through a magnifying glass, his expression shifting from skepticism to amazement. "Extraordinary," he murmured. "I've never seen anything like this. The craftsmanship alone." He looked up at Margot. "You understand what this means? If there's truly a hidden message in this portrait, it could rewrite our understanding of domestic life in Victorian Savannah." Margot felt a thrill of validation. "I'd like to examine the original glass negative. The digital scan can only reveal so much." Dr. Carr was already reaching for a form. "I'll sign the request immediately. The Whitlock Foundation will be delighted. They've been hoping for fresh publicity around their family artifacts." His pen moved quickly across the paper. "In fact, they've been quite generous with funding lately. A discovery like this could secure additional grants for years." Something in his tone made Margot pause. "The Whitlocks? They own this portrait?" "Technically, it's on permanent loan from the family trust, but yes, the portrait originates from the Whitlock estate on Bonaventure Row." Dr. Carr handed her the signed request form. "Take this to the archives immediately. I'll make some calls." Margot took the elevator to the basement archives, the request form burning in her pocket. Through the metal grating, she could see into the mechanical spaces between floors. A water pipe running along the ceiling looked swollen, beads of moisture collecting along its joints. She made a mental note to report it to maintenance, then forgot completely when the elevator doors opened onto the climate-controlled archive. The dark room was a temple of precision and patience, its red-filtered light casting everything in the color of dried blood. Margot gingerly lifted the glass negative from its archival housing and positioned it on the illuminated examination table. Unlike the scanned image, this original plate would show every detail exactly as the camera had captured it 140 years ago. Through the magnifying loop, the doll's dress seam came into sharp focus. The threadwork that had appeared blurry in the digital scan was now crystal clear, each tiny stitch precisely placed. The letters spelled out completely, "Help me." Margot's hands trembled as she picked up her macro photography equipment. She needed redundant documentation of this discovery. Multiple angles, different lighting conditions, everything that would hold up to academic scrutiny. The message was real. Someone in 1883 had sewn a cry for help into this doll's dress, knowing it would be photographed, hoping somehow that someone, someday, would notice. As she worked, adjusting lenses and checking exposures, a sound made her freeze. Crack. It was sharp, sudden, like the breaking of bone. Then came the rush of water. The burst pipe sent a torrent cascading through the ceiling tiles. Within seconds, water was pooling on the darkroom floor, advancing toward the examination table where the irreplaceable glass negative lay exposed. Alarms began blaring throughout the building. Emergency lighting flickered on. Margot snatched the glass negative from the table, holding it high above her head as water swirled around her ankles. The negative was safe, but for how long? She waded toward the door, each step careful and deliberate. One slip, one moment of carelessness, and 140 years of history would shatter on the flooded floor. Through the chaos, one thought echoed in her mind: help me. Across more than a century, someone had reached out, and Margot was perhaps the first person to truly hear that call. By noon, the archive basement resembled a disaster zone. Cleanup crews sloshed through ankle-deep water, their industrial pumps working overtime to drain the flooded rooms. The insurance adjuster, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a permanent frown, photographed every inch of damage with methodical precision. Margot stood in the hallway, watching her makeshift darkroom being dismantled. The examination table where she'd made her discovery was already being carried out, along with thousands of dollars worth of damaged equipment. "Ms. Reyes?" The adjuster approached with a clipboard thick with forms. "I need to discuss the Whitlock portrait with you." Her stomach dropped. "Is it damaged?" "No, but protocol requires us to move any at-risk materials off-site immediately for conservation assessment. The portrait and its glass negative must be removed within 72 hours. He flipped through his paperwork. "According to our records, ownership reverts to the Whitlock Family Trust once the items leave our premises." "Reverts?" "But it's on permanent loan. Permanent loan contingent on proper storage conditions," the adjuster said flatly. "The flood constitutes a breach of that agreement. The items will be transferred to the Whitlock Foundation's private conservation facility." Margot felt the world tilt. "When?" "Friday at 2 p.m. That gives you," he checked his watch, "approximately 71 hours. After the adjuster left, Margot found a quiet corner and called Dr. Carr. She could hear voices in the background, official-sounding conversations peppered with legal terminology. "I've just spoken with Whitlock Legal Counsel," Dr. Carr said without preamble. "The pickup is confirmed for Friday afternoon. I'm sorry, Margot. There's nothing I can do. The Foundation is within their rights, but the message we've barely begun to analyze. You'll have to wait. The Whitlocks are being very insistent about proper conservation procedures." His voice carried a weight of resignation. "Sometimes academic discovery must bow to practical realities." The call ended, leaving Margot staring at the chaos around her. 71 hours to solve a 140-year-old mystery. It wasn't enough time. By 4 a.m., Margot sat in her studio apartment, surrounded by printouts and laptop screens. Sleep was impossible. The ticking of her wall clock seemed unnaturally loud, each second marking the countdown to Friday afternoon, when the portrait would disappear into private hands, possibly forever. She'd spent hours combing through digitized Savannah police ledgers, searching for any reference to the Whitlock family in 1883. Most entries were routine: pickpockets, drunk and disorderly, the occasional domestic dispute. But one line buried in the records for July 19, 1883 made her pulse quicken. "Missing housemaid Keziah Brooks, 14 Whitlock residence, presumed runaway." The date was crucial. The portrait had been taken on July 18, 1883, according to the photographer's notation on the back. Keziah Brooks had vanished exactly 1 day after the photograph was made. Margot cross-referenced the name with census records, birth certificates, any trace of the girl's existence before or after that single police entry. Nothing. Keziah Brooks had appeared in the historical record long enough to be reported missing, then vanished completely. A housemaid, 14 years old. The same age Elena had been when she first started dating the boy who would eventually kill her. The parallels made Margot's chest tight with familiar grief. She pulled up the Savannah tourism website and scrolled through ghost tour options. If the Whitlock mansion still stood, if it was part of the regular tour circuit, she might be able to scout the grounds, get a feel for the layout before Friday's deadline. The Bonaventure Haunted History Tour departed at 10 a.m. daily, with stops at the city's most infamous addresses. The Whitlock mansion was featured prominently in the advertising. See the house where 13 servants vanished without explanation. 13 servants, not one, 13. Margot booked a ticket for the morning tour, then set her alarm for 8 a.m. As she finally drifted toward sleep, the police ledger entry echoed in her mind. Presumed runaway. No investigation, no follow-up. Just another missing girl that nobody bothered to find. The horse-drawn carriage clopped through Savannah's humid morning air, past squares draped in Spanish moss and mansions that dripped with antebellum grandeur. Margot sat in the back row, her camera bag discreetly positioned for quick access. The tour guide, a theatrical woman in period dress, regaled the dozen tourists with tales of ghostly apparitions and unexplained phenomena. "And here we have the crown jewel of our tour," the guide announced as they approached a massive Greek revival mansion. The Whitlock estate on Bonaventure Row. Built in 1847, it housed 3 generations of Savannah's most prominent family. But the house harbors dark secrets. Margot raised her camera, zooming in on the second-floor windows. Several were boarded up, including what appeared to be a corner room that might have been a nursery. Fresh padlocks secured sheets of plywood over the windows. A local legend tells of a possessed doll that screams at midnight, the guide continued with obvious relish. The current owners keep the nursery sealed, but neighbors still report strange sounds on quiet nights. "What about the missing servants?" asked a tourist. The guide's smile faltered slightly. "Unsubstantiated rumors, I'm afraid, though the family records do show unusually high turnover in household staff during the 1880. 13 people don't just disappear," pressed another visitor. "History is full of gaps," the guide replied smoothly, "and the Whitlock family's generous contributions to historic preservation ensure that Savannah's true stories are properly maintained, not sensationalized." The emphasis on true stories sent a chill down Margot's spine. As the carriage rolled past the mansion's wrought iron gates, she overheard the guide murmur to the driver, "Whitlock money keeps the real stories quiet. Always has." The tour continued, but Margot's attention remained fixed on the mansion's sealed nursery window. Whatever had happened in that room 140 years ago, someone was still working hard to keep it hidden. When the carriage returned to the town square at noon, Margot was already planning her next move. The Chatham County Courthouse would have the original coroner's records. If Keziah Brooks had truly disappeared, there would be an official investigation file. Unless, of course, there wasn't. The courthouse's microfilm room smelled of old paper and preservative chemicals. Afternoon sunlight slanted through tall windows, casting bars of light across motes of dust that danced in the stagnant air. Margot fed reel after reel through the viewing machine, searching for any official record of Keziah Brooks's disappearance. She found it in the coroner's files for July 1883, but instead of an investigation report, there was only a single notation: Keziah Brooks, housemaid, age 14. Missing from Whitlock residence 19 July 1883, presumed runaway. No further investigation warranted. Filed missing person, case closed. Below the terse summary was a signature, the same flowing script that appeared on dozens of other documents in the file, but this signature belonged not to the coroner, but to the witness who had attested to the girl's character and circumstances, Charles Whitlock III, head of the Whitlock Family Trust. Margot stared at the document until her eyes watered. A 14-year-old girl disappears from one of Savannah's most prominent households, and the only investigation consists of taking the word of her employer that she was a runaway. No interviews with other servants, no search of the grounds, no follow-up of any kind. She photographed the document from multiple angles, then searched for related files. Other servants had left the Whitlock household during the same period, some with proper references, others simply noted as departed without notice. 13 names in total, all between 1880 and 1885. As Margot worked, storm clouds gathered outside the courthouse windows. The afternoon light grew dim and greenish, carrying the electric tension that preceded Savannah's violent summer thunderstorms. She was making copies of the final documents when the first heavy drops splattered against the windows. Lightning flickered in the distance, followed by the low rumble of thunder rolling across the city. Margot gathered her photocopies and headed for the exit. As she stepped outside, the skies opened completely, sending sheets of rain across the courthouse steps. She ran for her car, clutching the documents against her chest, but the message was already burning in her mind. "Help me." Keziah Brooks had stitched her plea into a doll's dress, knowing that someone, someday, might understand. And now Margot was the only person alive who could hear that desperate call across 140 years of enforced silence. The archive basement hummed with the sound of industrial generators as Margot returned that evening at 8:12 p.m. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across the salvage operation, but the high-resolution scanner had been moved to a temporary workstation on the main floor. She had perhaps 36 hours before the portrait vanished into the Whitlock Foundation's private collection. She positioned the glass negative on the scanner bed and pushed the resolution to its maximum, 1,200 dots per inch. The resulting file would be enormous, but it would capture every microscopic detail of the threadwork message. As the scanner light swept across the plate, Margot held her breath. The image that emerged exceeded her wildest expectations. At maximum magnification, the doll's dress revealed not just letters but an intricate pattern of numerical values. Each stitch had been placed with mathematical precision, creating a cipher that was both message and map. She isolated the threadwork pattern and overlaid it with a coordinate grid. The numbers seemed to correspond to spatial relationships, possibly measurements, possibly a location key. Whatever Keziah Brooks had hidden in the doll's dress was more sophisticated than a simple cry for help. Margot emailed a detailed image to Sarah Chin, a college friend who specialized in textile history at Georgia Southern. The auto-reply that bounced back made her curse under her breath. Out of office until Thursday morning, emergency messages should be directed to. Thursday morning would be too late. The portrait would be gone by Friday afternoon. As she stared at the numerical cipher, her phone buzzed with a direct message on Instagram. The sender was someone called @Deshaun Diggs Deep, with a verified badge and over 100,000 followers. Saw your professor's post about the hidden message. I run a true crime podcast here in Savannah. Any chance you'd want to collaborate? This sounds like exactly the kind of story my audience loves. Margot checked his profile. Deshaun Pike, investigative podcaster specializing in cold cases and historical mysteries. His latest episode had over 50,000 views. She typed back, "Can you meet tomorrow morning? I might need help with crowdsourcing a cipher." The response came immediately. 8 a.m. Ellis Square Coffee. Let's solve this thing. Margot arrived at the Riverside Cafe at exactly 8 o'clock. I am to find Deshaun Pike already set up at a corner table, a professional-grade microphone positioned discreetly between 2 cups of coffee. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 25, with an easy smile and intelligent eyes that immediately put her at ease. "You look like someone who hasn't slept," he said by way of greeting. "I've been thinking about this case for 2 days straight." Margot sat down and pulled out her laptop. "Before we start, you need to understand something. This isn't just a historical curiosity. A girl died and someone covered it up. If we're going to tell this story, we tell it right." Deshaun's expression grew serious. "I've been researching the Whitlock family since you messaged me. 13 servants disappeared from that house between 1880 and 1885. 13. And somehow the official record shows nothing but routine staff turnover." Margot opened her laptop and showed him the cipher. "This is what Keziah Brooks left behind. I think it's more than just a message. I think it's a map." As she explained her analysis, Deshaun recorded everything, asking clarifying questions and occasionally stopping to take notes. His professional enthusiasm was infectious, and Margot found herself opening up about her sister's death, about her compulsion to give voice to the silenced. "We need to go live with this." Deshawn said when she finished. "Tonight, my audience is perfect for crowdsourcing cipher analysis. Between my followers and the algorithm push, we could have thousands of people looking at this by tomorrow morning. The Whitlocks won't like the publicity." "Good. Maybe it's time someone asked them the hard questions." Deshawn checked his phone. "I can have a teaser episode edited and uploaded by noon. Are you ready for this to get big?" Margot thought about Keziah Brooks, 14 years old and desperate enough to risk everything to leave a message. She thought about Elena, who never got the chance to call for help. "Yes," she said, "let's give her a voice." The paddle wheel boat's whistle echoed across the river as Deshawn hit record on his phone. "This is going to change everything," he said. "Are you ready?" Margot nodded, and together they began to tell the story of a girl who refused to be forgotten. By 3:00 p.m., Margot's phone was buzzing with notifications every few seconds. Deshawn's teaser episode had exploded across social media, accumulating over 20,000 views in just 6 hours. The hashtag, Savannah Doll Mystery, was trending locally, and amateur code breakers were already submitting theories about the cipher's meaning. But the attention was a double-edged sword. Among the supportive comments and analytical theories, official-looking responses had begun appearing. The Whitlock Foundation's verified accounts were posting carefully worded statements about respecting historical accuracy and avoiding sensationalized speculation. Then came the email. "Ms. Reyes," it began in formal legal language, "the Whitlock Foundation respectfully requests your cooperation in ensuring the accurate preservation of family historical materials. We would appreciate the opportunity to review any unpublished research or materials related to the 1883 portrait currently in your possession." The message was signed by Charles Whitlock IV, president of the Whitlock Foundation, and copied to 3 law firms. Margot read it twice, her stomach sinking. It wasn't technically a cease and desist order, but the implication was clear: cooperate or face legal consequences. Her phone rang. Dr. Carr's name appeared on the screen. "Margot, I've just received a very interesting call from the Whitlock Foundation," he said without preamble. "They're concerned about the online attention your discovery is receiving. Concerned enough to try silencing me? Concerned enough to invite you to a meeting tomorrow at noon. They want to discuss collaborative research opportunities." His tone suggested he didn't believe that's what they really wanted. "I'll be there as well, in an official capacity. And if I refuse, they've reminded me that the university's relationship with the foundation is worth several $1 million annually." Dr. Carr sighed. "I'm not saying you should agree to anything, but please be careful." After the call ended, Margot stared at her laptop screen. The cipher analysis was progressing. Several online communities had organized around specific theories, and a few solutions looked genuinely promising. But she was running out of time. The Whitlocks were moving to control the narrative, and her window for independent research was closing rapidly. One more day. She had one more day to solve a 140-year-old mystery before it disappeared forever into private hands. The Whitlock Foundation's boardroom occupied the top floor of a restored antebellum mansion on Bull Street, its windows offering panoramic views of Savannah's tree-lined squares. Margot arrived at noon to find Charles Whitlock IV waiting with 2 lawyers and Dr. Carr, who looked distinctly uncomfortable in his pressed suit. Charles Whitlock was exactly what she'd expected. Silver-hailed, impeccably dressed, with the kind of smooth southern charm that could make a rattlesnake sound reasonable. He rose from his chair with practiced grace and extended a manicured hand. "Ms. Reyes, such a pleasure to finally meet you. Your work is quite impressive." His smile was warm, but his eyes remained cold. "Please, have some sweet tea. It's freshly made." The lawyers introduced themselves with titles Margaret immediately forgot, but their presence was clear enough. This wasn't a collaborative meeting. It was a negotiation. "We've reviewed your preliminary findings with great interest," Charles continued once everyone was seated. "The Whitlock family has always been committed to historical accuracy, and we're eager to support your research in any way possible." One of the lawyers slid a folder across the mahogany table. We're prepared to offer you exclusive access to the family's private archives, including household records and personal diaries from the 1880s. The only condition is that any publications or public statements be reviewed by our Historical Advisory Board before release." Dr. Carr cleared his throat. "The university would, of course, need to maintain academic independence in any research collaboration." "Naturally," Charles said smoothly. "We're simply ensuring that family materials are presented in proper historical context." Margot opened the folder. The first page was a photocopy of a diary entry dated July 14, 1883, written in a child's careful handwriting. "Mama Beatrice says I must smile pretty for the cameraman tomorrow. She showed me how to hold my doll just so, and told me to pretend I don't hear any voices crying in the walls. The photograph will be beautiful, she says, and everyone will see what a perfect little girl I am." The signature at the bottom read, "L. Harper, Liddy Harper, the girl in the photograph." Margot's heart raced as she scanned the rest of the page, but it was the only entry included in the folder. A tantalizing glimpse of the truth, carefully edited and controlled. "This is fascinating," she said carefully, "but I'd need to see the complete diary, not just selected excerpts." Charles's smile never wavered. "Of course, once our collaboration agreement is finalized." The elevator descended in silence, carrying Margot and Dr. Carr away from the Whitlock Foundation's carefully controlled environment. Only when the doors opened onto the parking garage did Dr. Carr speak. "They're frightened," he said quietly. "That level of legal preparation doesn't happen overnight. They've been expecting something like this for a long time." Margot clutched the sealed envelope Charles Whitlock had given her as they left. A gesture of good faith, he'd called it, marked L. Harper, private in careful script. She waited until they reached her car before tearing it open. The single page inside was dated July 14, 1883, but it was a different entry than the one in the official folder. "Mama Beatrice took me to the garden after supper. She was carrying a small tin box and seemed very upset. She made me watch while she buried it behind the big camellia bushes near the fountain. Some secrets must stay buried, she told me, or they will destroy everything beautiful. Then she made me promise never to speak of what I saw. But I am writing it here because writing isn't speaking and someone should know." The box made a rattling sound like it had tiny bones inside. Margot's hands shook as she read the entry twice, then 3 times. The blistering afternoon sun made the interior of her car feel like an oven, but she barely noticed the heat. She pulled out her phone and compared the diary page to her analysis of the cipher. The mathematical precision of Keziah's stitches suddenly made perfect sense. They weren't just spelling out a message, they were mapping a location. Each stitch corresponded to a measurement, each pattern to a specific area of the grounds. The cipher was a treasure map, and the treasure was buried behind the camellia bushes, exactly where Liddy Harper had watched Beatrice Whitlock hide her secrets. The hot breeze rattled the pages in her hands, and for a moment, Margot could almost hear Alina's voice. Some stories need to be told, even when telling them is dangerous. She started the car and pulled out of the parking garage. She had 18 hours before the portrait disappeared forever. 18 hours to find a tin box that had been buried for 140 years, containing evidence that someone had killed to keep hidden. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as she drove toward Bonaventure Row, toward the mansion where 13 servants had vanished and where the truth lay buried beneath blooming camellias. At 11:46 p.m., Margot and Deshawn crouched in the shadows beside the Whitlock mansion's wrought iron fence. The moonless night provided perfect cover, and the live-stream camera clip to Deshawn's shirt transmitted to nearly 300 viewers who had followed the developing mystery. "We're about to enter the property where Keziah Brooks disappeared in 1883. Deshawn whispered to his audience, "The cipher she left behind has led us here to this exact location." Margot felt her heart pounding as they scaled the side fence, dropping quietly into the overgrown garden. Spanish moss hung like funeral shrouds from ancient oak trees, and the air was thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. They found the camellia bushes exactly where Liddy's diary had indicated, a cluster of old-growth plants behind a crumbling stone fountain. But it was Deshawn who noticed the anomaly. "Look at this," he whispered, kneeling beside one particularly large bush. "The ground here is different, softer." Margot examined the soil with her phone's flashlight. Someone had been digging here recently, within the last few weeks, judging by the disturbed earth. But they hadn't gone deep enough. "The cipher indicates 3 feet down, precisely," she said, pulling a folding shovel from her backpack. "Whatever's buried here, someone else has been looking for it." They dug in silence, taking turns with the shovel while Deshawn's camera captured everything. At exactly 3 feet, the shovel struck something metallic. The tin box was smaller than Margot had expected, barely the size of a jewelry case, but when she lifted it from the earth, it rattled with the sound Liddy had described, like tiny bones. Inside wasn't bones, but something almost as significant. A copper lens, no bigger than a silver dollar, etched with 14 names in microscopic script. At the top of the list, in letters barely visible to the naked eye, was Keziah Brooks, age 14. "Jesus," Deshawn breathed, his camera capturing every detail. "How many people died in that house?" Margaret was still counting names when a red LED began flashing behind them. A silent security alarm activated by motion sensors they hadn't noticed in the darkness. "We need to go," she said, snapping the box shut. "Now!" But even as they ran for the fence, Margot knew the discovery had changed everything. 14 names. 14 servants who had supposedly left without notice, but whose names were now etched in copper and buried like a memorial to the forgotten dead. Footsteps echoed through the mansion as Margot and Deshawn sprinted toward the fence. Margot clutched the copper lens while Deshawn dropped his camera, but managed to save the memory card, stuffing it into his pocket as they climbed over the wrought iron barrier. They didn't stop running until they reached Deshawn's car 3 blocks away, both breathing hard and checking over their shoulders for pursuit. The live stream had captured everything: the digging, the discovery, the hasty escape, and the comment feed was exploding with theories and reactions. "We did it," Deshawn panted, starting the engine. "We actually found it. We found it." But the euphoria was short-lived. By morning, the consequences began cascading like dominoes. Margot's phone rang at 7:00 a.m., with Dr. Carr's shaken voice delivering the news. "The university is terminating your fellowship, effective immediately," he said. "Trespassing on private property, damaging community relations with a major donor. I fought for you, Margot, but the board was unanimous. They can, and they have. You're being evicted from university housing by the end of the week. I'm sorry." The next call came from her department advisor, then her thesis committee chair, each one expressing regret while firmly distancing themselves from her actions. By noon, Margot was effectively persona non grata in academic circles. She was sitting on a bus bench outside her soon-to-be former apartment, contemplating her complete professional destruction, when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Ms. Reyes, this is Ruth Brooks. I'm 82 years old and I saw your broadcast last night." The voice was clear and strong despite its age. "I think we need to talk." "I'm sorry, who?" "Keziah Brooks was my great-grandmother. She wasn't a runaway, and she didn't leave that house alive." There was a pause filled with decades of accumulated pain. "I've been waiting my whole life for someone to find that lens. Can you meet me tomorrow morning before they silence you completely?" Margaret's exhaustion evaporated. "Where?" "Bonaventure Cemetery, Section M, Plot 247. It's unmarked, but I'll be there at sunrise. And Ms. Reyes, bring the lens. It's time to give my great-grandmother the burial she never had." The call ended, leaving Margot staring at her phone. Ruth Brooks, a living connection to Keziah, to the truth that someone had killed to keep buried. Tomorrow at sunrise. One last chance to solve a mystery that had already cost her everything. Dawn fog drifted between the moss-draped oaks of Bonaventure Cemetery as Margot approached the unmarked grave in Section M. Ruth Brooks was already there, a small woman with silver hair and intelligent eyes, holding a bouquet of white camellias. "You look like someone who's lost everything," Ruth said by way of greeting. "Good, that means you understand the stakes." Margaret showed her the copper lens, watching as the elderly woman's face crumpled with recognition and pain. "She was so young," Ruth whispered. 14, same age as you are in that photograph. But she was braver than anyone gave her credit for. Smart enough to leave a message. Hope someone would eventually understand. Ruth reached into a worn canvas bag and withdrew a muslin pouch. Inside was a piece of blue fabric, carefully preserved for 140 years. "This is from the doll's dress," Ruth explained. "My great-grandmother kept a spare piece when she sewed the message. Look at the stitching." Under Margaret's phone flashlight, the fabric revealed its final secret. More threadwork, as precise as the rest, spelling out N-U-R, 3 South Wall. Margaret breathed. She hid something there, or someone hid something there. Ruth's voice carried the weight of generational grief. The family's been renovating that mansion piece by piece for decades, but they've never touched the nursery. Always kept it sealed, always claimed it was structurally unsafe. The sun broke through the Spanish moss overhead, casting long shadows across the cemetery grounds. Ruth placed the camellias on the unmarked grave. "I've been waiting 82 years for someone to ask the right questions," she said. "There's an HVAC inspection scheduled at the mansion this afternoon. Old buildings, you know, always need maintenance. I happen to know the contractor. You want to go inside? I want to finish what my great-grandmother started." She left us a map and we've followed it this far. Ruth's smile was sharp as steel. "Besides, what else can they do to us? You've already lost your career, and I'm too old to care about consequences." Margot looked at the unmarked grave, thinking about Keziah Brooks and the message she'd risked everything to leave. About Elena, who never got the chance to ask for help. About all the silenced voices that deserved to be heard. "What time this afternoon?" 2 o'clock. Service entrance. Ruth tucked the fabric back into her bag. "It's time to give the dead some peace." At 2:00 p.m. sharp, Ruth Brooks approached the Whitlock Mansion's service entrance, wearing a simple gray dress and carrying a vintage sewing basket. To the HVAC contractor and his assistant, she appeared to be exactly what her fake credentials claimed, a retired textile conservator consulting on historical fabric preservation. Margot followed close behind, clipboard in hand, playing the role of research assistant with nervous energy barely contained. The contractor, more interested in his ventilation assessment than historical preservation, waved them through with minimal scrutiny. The mansion's interior was a museum of preserved antebellum grandeur. Crystal chandeliers, imported marble, oil paintings, and gilt frames. But Margaret's attention focused on the sealed staircase leading to the second floor, where the boarded-up nursery waited. "Structural issues," the contractor explained when Ruth asked about the sealed room. "Family keeps saying they'll renovate, but something always comes up." Ruth nodded sympathetically. "Old houses have such stories to tell. Sometimes I think they hold on to their secrets longer than people do." The contractor left them alone while he examined air ducts in the basement. Ruth moved with surprising speed for her age, leading Margot up the sealed staircase to the nursery door. The heavy wooden panel was secured with a modern deadbolt, but Ruth produced an antique skeleton key from her sewing basket. "My great-grandmother wasn't the only one who planned ahead," she said with a wink. Inside, the nursery was a shrine to arrested time. Dust sheets covered furniture that hadn't been moved in decades. Afternoon light filtered through cracks in the boarded windows, casting bars of illumination across peeling wallpaper decorated with dancing children. The third south wall was immediately obvious, a section of wainscoting that didn't quite match the rest, as if it had been hastily repaired or replaced. Ruth ran her hands along the wood grain until she found what she was looking for, a panel that shifted slightly under pressure. "Help me," she said, and together they pried the panel away from the wall. Behind it lay a cavity that should have been empty. Instead, they found skeletal remains, small, clearly those of a young person, clutching a final page from Liddy Harper's diary. Ruth Brooks sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, baby girl," she whispered. "We found you. We finally found you." Margot's hands trembled as she carefully extracted the diary page from the skeletal fingers. The paper was yellowed and brittle, but Liddy Harper's careful handwriting was still legible after 140 years. July 20, 1883. Mama Beatrice has been talking to people who aren't there again. She sees babies in every corner, hears crying from empty rooms. Dr. Whitlock says it's the grief from losing her real baby, but I think something broke inside her when little Charles died. She keeps calling me her perfect angel and saying I must never grow up, never leave her. Tonight, she gave me medicine that made everything feel far away. When I woke up, I was here behind the wall and I can hear her boarding it up. She's singing a lullaby, but I can't make my voice work to call for help. The air is getting thin. I hope someone finds this someday. I hope they understand that she wasn't evil, just broken. Please, don't let them hurt her. She loved me as much as her hurt heart could love anyone. Dear God, Margot whispered. Ruth wiped her eyes and read the page again. Postpartum psychosis. The poor woman lost her mind after her baby died, and nobody knew how to help her. But the other servants, Keziah, the others on the lens, he probably saw them as threats to her perfect little family. Or maybe they knew too much, asked too many questions. Ruth's voice was heavy with generational pain. 14 people, Margot. 14 people died because one woman's grief drove her to madness and her husband chose protecting the family name over protecting the innocent. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Someone had triggered an alarm, or perhaps the contractor had grown suspicious of their extended absence. We need to document this properly, Margot said, pulling out her phone to photograph the remains in the diary page. The police, the coroner, proper forensic examination. They'll cover it up again, Ruth said sadly, just like they did before. Rich families don't change, honey. They just get better at bearing their mistakes. But Margot pocketed the diary page and helped Ruth to her feet. Not this time. This time the whole world is watching. The sirens were getting closer, but for the first time in days, Margot felt something approaching peace. They had found Keziah Brooks. They had given voice to the silenced, and no amount of money or legal maneuvering could put that truth back in the ground. By 4:30 p.m., Margot sat in her sterile motel room with the diary page spread across the polyester bedspread. The skeletal remains were now in the custody of the Chatham County coroner. Despite the Whitlock family's frantic attempts to claim jurisdiction over family property, Ruth had gone home to rest, but not before pressing a wrinkled business card into Margot's hand. Dr. Sarah Henley, it read. Forensic anthropologist. She owes me a favor, and she's not afraid of rich families. The motel room door rattled with a hesitant knock. Margot opened it to find Dr. Carr standing in the hallway, his distinguished facade cracked with exhaustion and something that might have been shame. May I come in? He asked quietly. She stepped aside, watching as he surveyed the modest room. Such a contrast to the mahogany and crystal of his usual environment. I've submitted my resignation to the university, he said without preamble. Effective immediately. Dr. Carr, you don't need to. Yes, I do. He sat heavily in the room's single chair, suddenly looking every one of his 62 years. I've spent 30 years protecting the comfortable lives of this city's elite families, calling it historical preservation and maintaining relationships with donors. But what I really did was help them bury the truth. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a thick manila envelope. This contains copies of every document the Whitlock Foundation asked me to suppress over the years. Police reports, coroner's notes, servant testimony that was deemed unreliable. I should have released these decades ago. Margaret opened the envelope, scanning page after page of evidence that painted a picture of systematic cover-ups spanning generations. Beatrice Whitlock hadn't been the only family member with blood on her hands. The patriarch Charles Whitlock III had orchestrated the disposal of bodies, the bribery of officials, the creation of false records that turned murder victims into runaways. Tomorrow morning we hold a press conference, Dr. Carr continued. City Hall steps, 10 a.m. I'll present the historical evidence, you'll share your discoveries, and we'll let the world decide what justice looks like after 140 years. Margot felt something loosening in her chest, the first full breath she'd taken in days. What about the foundation, the legal threats? Dr. Carr's smile was tired but genuine. Let them try. I'm an old man with Parkinson's disease and nothing left to lose. And you're a brilliant researcher who's already sacrificed everything for the truth. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. Besides, some stories are bigger than the people trying to silence them. The City Hall steps buzzed with activity at 10 o'clock a.m. as reporters from regional news outlets set up cameras and microphones. Deshawn's live stream had exploded overnight, reaching over 120,000 viewers who had followed the mystery from its beginning. The crowd included descendants of Savannah's forgotten servants, local historians and curiosity seekers, drawn by the promise of explosive revelations. Margot stood beside Dr. Carr at the makeshift podium, the copper lens glinting in the morning sunlight. Behind them, Ruth Brooks sat with quiet dignity, flanked by other elderly African-American women who had been waiting their whole lives for this moment. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Carr began, his voice steady despite the slight tremor in his hands. I stand before you today to confess to 30 years of institutional cowardice. The Savannah College of Art and Design, working in collaboration with the Whitlock Foundation, has systematically suppressed evidence of multiple murders that occurred between 1880 and 1885. A murmur ran through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in as Dr. Carr held up the manila envelope. These documents proved that 14 domestic workers, most of them young women of color, were killed by members of the Whitlock family. Their deaths were covered up by corrupt officials, their bodies disposed of secretly, and their families told they had simply run away. Margot stepped forward, holding the copper lens where everyone could see it. This artifact, buried on the Whitlock property for 140 years, contains the names of all 14 victims. It was hidden by Keziah Brooks, a 14-year-old housemaid who managed to leave behind evidence that would eventually expose the truth. She told the complete story, the hidden message in the doll's dress, the cipher that led to the buried lens, the discovery of Liddy Harper's remains behind the nursery wall. With each revelation, the crowd's attention intensified. Yesterday, the Chatham County coroner confirmed the identity of remains found in the Whitlock mansion. Dr. Carr announced, DNA analysis will determine if other burial sites exist on the property. A reporter shouted questions, but it was Charles Whitlock IV who commanded attention as he approached the podium with his legal team. To Margot's surprise, he looked genuinely shaken. The Whitlock Foundation, he said in a voice barely above a whisper, pledges full cooperation with any investigation. We will fund a memorial to honor all 14 victims, and we will ensure that their stories are told truthfully. The applause was mixed with tears as descendants in the crowd recognized names they had thought lost forever. Ruth Brooks stepped forward and lit the first candle at an impromptu memorial, her voice carrying across the square as she spoke her great-grandmother's name for the first time in public. Keziah Brooks, age 14. She died trying to save others. The Telfair Museum's conservation laboratory hummed with quiet efficiency at 2:00 p.m. as Margot watched the museum's chief curator examine the restored 1883 portrait. Dr. Elena Vasquez handled the frame with white-gloved reverence, her expert eye cataloging every detail of the historic photograph. The interactive display will be extraordinary, Dr. Vasquez said, gesturing to the wall-mount screens being installed nearby. Visitors will be able to zoom in on any section of the portrait with special emphasis on the doll's hidden message. Margot nodded, watching technicians test the touchscreen interface. When visitors tapped on the doll's dress, the display would magnify the threadwork and highlight Keziah's cipher, accompanied by audio narration that told her story in clear, respectful terms. The exhibit text is ready for your final approval, Dr. Vasquez continued. handing Margaret a printed placard. The words were simple but powerful. This portrait, taken July 18, 1883, shows 10-year-old Liddy Harper with her doll. Hidden in the doll's dress is a message stitched by 14-year-old housemaid Keziah Brooks, who disappeared the next day. Modern technology revealed her cry for help after 140 years of silence. Keziah Brooks and 13 other domestic workers were murdered in the Whitlock household between 1885. Their deaths were covered up by powerful families and corrupt officials. This exhibit honors their memory and the courage of those who left evidence for future generations to discover. Their message to us across the centuries: you are not alone. Margot ran her finger over the final line, remembering Elena's voice, Ruth's tears, Liddy's desperate final diary entry. She thought about all the silenced voices that deserved to be heard, all the forgotten victims who needed someone to speak their names. "It's perfect," she said. Deco smiled. "The opening is scheduled for this weekend. The mayor will be here, along with descendants of the victims and representatives from the Whitlock Foundation. It should be quite a ceremony." As the afternoon sun slanted through the laboratory windows, Margot affixed the first draft of the exhibit label to the portrait's frame. The words caught the light. "You are not alone." For the first time since this all began, she truly believed them. The memorial ceremony began at 6:00 p.m. as sunset painted the Savannah River in shades of gold and crimson. Hundreds of people gathered along the waterfront, holding candles that reflected like stars on the dark water. The Spanish moss stirred in the evening breeze, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour. Ruth Brooks stood at the edge of the water, her weathered hands steady as she lit the first memorial candle. Behind her, 13 other elderly women stepped forward, descendants of the forgotten servants, grandchildren and great-grandchildren who had carried their ancestors' stories in whispered family histories. "Keziah Brooks," Ruth said clearly, her voice carrying across the water. Age 14, seamstress, daughter, sister, remembered. One by one, the other women spoke their ancestors' names into the gathering darkness. Mary Washington, Thomas Chen, Sarah Mitchell, names that had been erased from official records but preserved in family memory for 5 generations. Margot stood with the crowd, watching as each candle joined the growing constellation of light. The ceremony was simple, dignified, free from the grandiose speeches of politicians or the carefully worded statements of institutions. It was about remembrance, about giving voice to those who had been silenced. As the last name was spoken, the crowd began releasing paper lanterns into the evening sky. Each one carried a victim's name written in careful script, rising into the humid air like prayers or promises. Dr. Carr appeared beside Margot, walking slowly but steadily. His Parkinson's symptoms seemed less pronounced in the flickering candlelight. "I've been thinking about legacy," he said quietly, "about what we leave behind when we're gone." Margot watched the lanterns drift higher, becoming distant points of light against the deepening sky. "What do you think they would want to be remembered for?" "Courage," he said without hesitation. "The courage to leave evidence, to tell the truth even when it was dangerous. The courage to hope that someone, someday, would listen." Ruth Brooks joined them, her face peaceful despite the tears still drying on her cheeks. "My great-grandmother would be proud," she said. "She never got justice in life, but she got something else. She got truth." The church bells continued tolling across the city as the ceremony drew to a close. People began to drift away, but many lingered, reluctant to let go of the moment. Margaret felt a profound sense of completion, as if a circuit that had been broken for 140 years had finally been restored. At 11:30 p.m., Margot sat on the narrow motel bed with her borrowed laptop open to a grant application portal. The Keziah Initiative proposal glowed on the screen, 10 pages outlining a digital humanities project that would use advanced imaging technology to uncover hidden messages in historical photographs, documents, and artifacts. The mission statement was clear: to give voice to the voiceless by revealing stories that powerful interests have worked to suppress. to honor forgotten victims of domestic violence, abuse, and exploitation by ensuring their experiences are documented and remembered. The budget was modest, enough for equipment, travel, and a small staff of graduate students who shared her passion for historical justice. The methodology was sound, building on techniques she had developed during the Whitlock investigation. The need was overwhelming, as her inbox could attest. In the week since the press conference, she had received dozens of messages from families with their own buried stories, their own ancestors who had disappeared without explanation. Margot scrolled through the application one final time, checking every detail. The funding agency specialized in projects that bridge technology and social justice, exactly the kind of work the Keziah Initiative represented. If approved, it would provide enough resources to keep her work going for 3 years. She thought about Elena, who would have loved the idea of photographs talking across centuries, about Ruth Brooks, who had waited 8 decades for someone to ask the right questions, about Liddy Harper, whose final diary entry had revealed not just the truth about her own death, but a compassionate understanding of her killer's broken mind. Most of all, she thought about Keziah Brooks, 14 years old, working by candlelight to stitch a message into a doll's dress, with threads so fine it took modern technology to read her plea for help. Keziah had believed that someone someday would understand. That faith had been vindicated. Margot positioned her cursor over the submit button. Through the motel window, she could hear the distant sound of a steamboat whistle on the river, the same sound that would have echoed across Savannah 140 years ago, when a young seamstress worked late into the night, leaving evidence for a future she would never see. She clicked submit. The confirmation email arrived immediately. Application received. Review process begins within 30 business days. Margot closed the laptop and allowed herself to smile. Win or lose, the Keziah Initiative was real now. A proposal floating in digital space, waiting to be evaluated by people who understood the power of hidden stories. For the first time in weeks, she slept without dreaming. 7 days had passed since the memorial ceremony, and Savannah still buzzed with the revelation that had shattered one of its oldest family legends. The Tilfair Museum's grand reopening drew visitors from across the Southeast, all eager to see the portrait that had exposed a 140-year-old conspiracy. At 10:00 a.m. on Saturday morning, the museum's main gallery was packed with families, tourists, and local residents whose ancestors had been touched by the Whitlock tragedy. The portrait hung in a place of honor, surrounded by interactive displays that allowed visitors to explore every detail of Keziah's hidden message. A young girl, perhaps 8 years old, approached the touchscreen display with wide-eyed curiosity. Her finger traced across the doll's image, following the prompt to discover the hidden message. The screen responded with smooth magnification, revealing the threadwork that spelled out, "Help me," in letters barely visible to the naked eye. But then something magical happened. As the message reached maximum magnification, the letters began to shift and flow, transforming into new words. "You are not alone." The transformation was accompanied by gentle audio narration, Margaret's voice explaining how modern technology had revealed Keziah's cipher, followed by Ruth Brooks sharing her great-grandmother's story. The presentation was educational without being exploitative, moving without being manipulative. "Wow," the little girl whispered, calling her parents over to see. "The doll can talk." Margot stood near the back of the gallery with Ruth Brooks, watching as visitors engaged with the exhibit. Some people spent only a few minutes reading the basic information, but others lingered for half an hour or more, exploring every aspect of the story. "She would have loved this," Ruth said quietly, knowing that her message reached so many people, that her voice is finally being heard. Through the gallery's tall windows, Margot could see the Savannah River flowing past, carrying steamboats and pleasure craft under the same sky that had witnessed Keziah's desperate attempt to leave evidence. The cicadas were singing in the Spanish moss, their ancient rhythm unchanged by the passage of time. Dr. Carr approached with his slow but steady gait, a genuine smile brightening his features. "The Smithsonian called this morning," he said. "They want to feature the story in next year's exhibition on technology and historical justice." Margot nodded, but her attention remained focused on the visitors, discovering Keziah's message for the first time. Each person who read those words, "You are not alone," was receiving a gift across the centuries. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, someone cares enough to listen. The camera slowly pulled back from the scene, revealing the two women standing side by side in the afternoon light. Outside, the cicada chorus gradually faded into the distant sound of a steamboat whistle on the river. Savannah breathed its ancient rhythm, carrying new stories into an uncertain future, but also preserving the voices that refused to be forgotten. The portrait watched over it all with patient dignity, its secret finally revealed, its message finally heard. In the end, that was all anyone could ask for: to be seen, to be remembered, to know that their voice mattered. The story was complete, but the echoes would continue forever,